All right, so this time we're going to try it with a little video. Uh, and we're going to go over the different types of blood vessels and all the different blood vessels, starting with the head. So, of your blood vessels, you have three major types. You're going to have your arteries, you're going to have your veins, and then you're going to have the capillaries that join those two together. The arteries are always going to be the vessels that are going away from the heart, and the veins are going to be the vessels going to the heart. So when we talk about the pulmonary circuit, the blood that goes to the lungs, those arteries carrying that blood to the lungs is actually deoxygenated, so it doesn't have a lot of oxygen in it. When those veins coming from the lungs back to the heart actually have a lot of oxygen. So when we're talking about arteries and veins, you really can't say deoxygenated and oxygenated. Like, it's not that the arteries always have oxygenated blood. Sometimes it has deoxygenated. The big difference is it going away from the heart or to the heart? In arteries, A for away, right? So the artery is always going away, and then the vein would go to. And the reason, or how we're able to say this is an artery versus a vein, is when you look at them in cross-section. Here's your artery. Both your arteries and your veins have this inner lining called the tunica interna. This tunica interna is made up of simple squamous cells, so just one layer of these really thin, flat cells. And then when you move deeper to that, or more superficial to that, you get your tunica media, or this middle layer. If you look at the tunica media in the artery, it's a lot thicker than it is right here in the vein. And that's because the blood coming out of the heart is being pumped at a much higher pressure. And so this pressure that the arteries are under is much higher than the pressure the veins are under. And so it needs a thicker tunica media, or more smooth muscle, to hold all that pressure in so it doesn't explode. What is the pressure coming out of the heart? Well, that's going to be your blood pressure, right? And so when we take blood pressure, we're taking arterial blood pressure, which on average is about 120 over 80, or 120 systolic when the heart is contracting and forcing out against the walls of those vessels, and 80 whenever the heart is relaxing and filling back up with blood. There's still pressure on these arterial walls. Versus in the veins, the pressure down in your veins is less than 10. It is really low pressure, and so a lot of the times your arteries are considered pressure vessels, while your veins are considered capitance vessels, or vessels that are allowed to just hold the blood to transport it back to the heart slowly. When we get down to your capillaries, if you look at them, they're just one layer of these really thin endothelial cells, or that same stuff that the tunica interna is made out of, simple squamous cells. And this allows for diffusion throughout these cells really simply, versus these where you have more than one layer, and some of that layer can be really thick. These individuals really let that diffusion take place out and back in. A different way to look at this, here you can see the artery again, that tunica interna, or that simple squamous, and then you see a subendothelial layer. It's similar to this basement layer that you see in the capillaries. Both your arteries and your veins have that. And then the arteries have an extra internal elastic lamina. When you hear elastic, what do you think of? You think of stuff that's like stretchy. And that's what this elastic lamina is. And then again, that really thick tunica media in your arteries, but not so in those veins. And that tunica media is going to be made up of smooth muscle and elastic fibers. Then you get down again, the artery has another layer called the external elastic lamina. Again, elastic to allow that stretch and that recoil, which helps to pump blood through your body. And then you get your tunica externa, which is just going to be collagenous fibers, sometimes called the adventitia. Again, down here to your capillaries, being that interchange between the blood going away from the heart and going back to the heart. When you're thinking about your circulatory system, you should think of it kind of like a one-way road. So those arteries are always going to be going away from the heart. The veins are always going to be going back to the heart. And you don't have two-way traffic there. It's always flowing unidirectional or only in one direction. As we go through these, I really want you to pay attention for pulse points. So areas where you can feel your heartbeat. Okay? Do you know any pulse points? Just think about it. You can look here, and this woman has them highlighted. One that we typically check is your radial pulse, also your carotid pulse. Going through the vessels of the head, this first one we're going to do is the superficial temporal artery. So if you reach up right above that temporal area on your head, maybe right in front of your ear, up a little bit, you can touch there and you can feel your heartbeat. So this superficial temporal artery is a pulse point. We move to the back of the head behind the ear. Put your finger back here. Some people can feel the pulse back here, but typically the occipital artery is not a pulse point. Coming down, we now have our internal carotid artery. So right here, where you take that pulse point, this is the common carotid. And so if you're looking at this, this would be the common carotid. And then it splits into external and internal. So this internal common carotid artery is not a pulse point. And then we go down to the external carotid artery, also not a pulse point. You take it down here of that common carotid. But your external comes up, and then you get some divisions in it going to different vessels, or being named into different vessels. And one that I want to highlight real quick that's not on this is this one that comes up through that vertebral foramen. This is your vertebral artery. Also not a pulse point. Coming over to the other side, we have our facial artery. So branching off of this external carotid artery is your facial artery. So if you put your fingers right up here on your cheek, on your mandible right there, you can push, and you can also feel a pulse. So your facial artery is also a pulse point. Going to the next one, your mental artery, the ones that come out of those mental foramen. Your mental artery, not a pulse point. And then your maxillary artery. So this is another one that branches off of that external carotid and comes up to the maxilla, also not a pulse point. And those are all the arteries of the head that I really want you to know. Coming over and looking at the veins, again, the first one I want you to know is that one on the back of the head. This is the occipital artery, or occipital vein. And then coming down over here, behind the vertebral vein, you have your external jugular vein, which feeds into that occipital artery. And here you can see the vertebral vein going through those vertebral foramen or foramina. And then on the other side, you have your internal jugular vein. So this is the jugular vein people talk about when they talk about cutting your jugular. They're talking about this internal one right here, which drains a lot of the blood from the brain. So you have these sinuses. You have this big one up here called the dural sinus that drains a lot of the blood from the brain, and that blood flows down through this internal jugular. So when we're thinking about these All these are taking blood away from the brain, where your arteries are taking blood to the brain, right? Going away from the heart. So this is all coming back down towards the heart. So here's your internal jugular. And then we have our facial. If you remember, the facial on your arteries ran right here by this ramus to drain or to give blood to the face. The facial is doing the opposite, removing blood from the face. And then here again is your maxillary, draining the blood from the maxillary region. And your temporal, draining blood from the temporal region, and that goes down again into that internal jugular. So, which veins were pulse points? None of them. Because the blood is at such low pressures in your veins that you can't feel that heartbeat. It doesn't happen anymore. It's only in the arteries that you have pulse points. And the ones that we just talked about were the temporal and the facial. And what are the difference between arteries and veins? Well, your arteries are going to have that thicker tunica media. And one thing that I did not mention is that a lot of your veins have valves. These valves, since that blood pressure is so low, these valves stop the backflow of blood. And it's really important in the vessels that you find below the heart. The ones above the heart, well, gravity is going to do the draining there. But the ones below the heart, you have these valves that help stop the backflow of blood. And we are going to stop there and pick up with the vessels of the trunk next time.